everyone, today we're talking about what age of kitten you should foster. Every age of kitten has a different set of needs, and some of those needs you may not be able to provide yet, so it's important to know what age of kitten you're willing to foster before you sign up to foster, so you can let your foster coordinator know exactly what you're comfortable with. Also, I know I'm wearing the same exact thing in this video as maybe a couple of my other videos, but I'm pre-filming, so that's why. So kittens that are newborn to 2 weeks old will need formula fed, stimulated to go to the bathroom, and they'll also need a heat source at all times. Now, to be clear, we are talking about orphaned kittens newborn to 2 weeks old. If they're with their mother, they will have very different needs, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but right now we're talking about orphaned. These kittens might need syringe fed because they might have a little bit of a hard time drinking out of a bottle. So that's very similar to bottle feeding. There's just a few differences. It requires a little extra patience and attention. You have to go very slowly and make sure the kitten is swallowing every drop so he or she doesn't choke. Weighing them before and after every meal is important to make sure they are gaining and definitely not losing. Kittens under 2 weeks old will need fed about every 2 hours, including throughout the night. So if you're not willing to get up during the night to feed kittens, you should foster some older kittens. Kittens this small can't regulate their body temperature yet, so they'll need a heat source to make sure they are nice and warm at all times. It's also very important to make sure kittens are warm before feeding them. So if you found them outside, especially if it's cold outside, you need to slowly warm them up until they are warm enough to feed. You'll also have to stimulate them with a soft tissue to help them go to the bathroom. And we're talking about orphaned kittens. If the mom is with the kittens, you won't have to do this. As long as she's taking good care of them, this will be something she does. They aren't able to groom themselves yet either, so you'll have to make sure you clean them up after every meal, after they go to the bathroom, to make sure they stay nice and clean. Kittens 2 to 3 weeks old. Now, kittens between the age of 2 and 3 weeks old will have basically the same care we just talked about. They'll still need a heat source, they'll still have to be stimulated to go to the bathroom, but at this point you can probably be bottle feeding instead of syringe feeding. You will probably be able to go closer to 3 or 4 hours between feedings as well, but you'll still need to be waking up during the night to feed them. They still won't be grooming themselves very well, have to make sure to stay on top of that. Closer to the age of 3 weeks old, they might begin to have accidents and go to the bathroom by themselves, but they won't be using the litter box just yet. Kittens 3 weeks to 4 weeks old. Kittens will start learning the litter box between these ages. They will start to go by themselves and won't need stimulated as often, and they'll discover the litter box pretty easily. I've never really heard of a kitten having trouble learning the litter box as long as it's easily accessible and you're using the right kind of litter. As they're learning this, you'll probably have to be doing a lot of laundry because they aren't going to get it right the first time. Kittens at this age are still eating formula about every 4 to 5 hours and still being fed throughout the night. However, if you time your feedings right, you'll only have to get up maybe once throughout the night. The kittens at this age should probably still have a heat source if possible, and they will probably start grooming themselves around this age, but won't be great at it yet. So make sure you still are checking in, cleaning them up after mealtime, and that kind of thing. Kittens 4 weeks to 5 weeks old. Kittens will probably be weaning around this time, and if you get kittens in around this age, they may already be weaned. I know all of mine that were 4 to 5 weeks old were already weaned when I got them. Now you'll want to ask about this before you bring them home, and you may need to back up a little bit and bottle feed some, depending on the kitten. You know, every kitten is different, but you'll definitely want to be weighing before and after meals to make sure they're steadily gaining, especially during this weaning time, because it's very easy for us to assume they're getting enough wet food, but they really aren't. This is what happened with my current litter of foster kittens. I was told they were eating wet food all on their own, and they just weren't really growing that much. You have to be very careful to clean up after meals because weaning can be a very, very messy time. You might even have to bathe the kittens a couple of times, depending on how well they're learning. They'll be eating about every 5 or 6 hours. If they're not eating enough at each meal, you may need to feed them more often. Kittens at this age don't necessarily need a heat source, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to leave it in there if you already have it. If you don't have one, just make sure you keep the room at a warm temperature, warm enough for the kitten. Kittens 5 weeks to 8 weeks old. At this age, kittens will be weaned. They will be grooming themselves mostly. Again, they're still kittens, so they might not have the hang of it completely, but you will mostly not have to do any of the grooming. You'll be confidently using the litter box. Your job at this point is mostly to monitor them, make sure they're getting the socialization they need, to play with them, and of course to still feed them. They'll eat wet food about every 6 hours at this point, and you can start them on dry food as well. When I start kittens on dry food, I usually make it a little bit wet with some water or formula, or try to mix it in with their wet food. You'll have to kind of see what works for your specific kitten. But then I give them access to dry food at all times and then feed them wet food at specific meal times throughout the day. Kittens of 8 weeks old. Depending on who you're fostering with, kittens are generally neutered at around 8 weeks old. As long as they weigh 2 pounds or more, they're okay for the surgery. So make sure you show up for any appointments that they ask you to show up for. My rescue at this point will take the kittens back once they've been neutered and they're put on the adoption floor. Other organizations will ask you to keep the kittens in your home until they are adopted. Just make sure you are very clear, have very clear communication with your foster coordinator so you know exactly what's happening. Now I want to talk a little bit about fostering babies with a mom. If you don't have a lot of time and don't want to wake up during the night to feed kittens, this is probably a better option for you, especially if you have to work during the day or go to school. You do have to monitor closely to make sure the babies are gaining, so you will be weighing them at certain times during the day and make sure they're not losing any weight and that they're gaining appropriately for their age. You may have to bottle feed supplementally if the mom is not making enough milk or if she doesn't really know how to feed them correctly. She will most likely take care of all stimulating and cleaning. But again, if you see something is not quite right with this, then you'll have to step in and do some of this work yourself. Even weaning is easier at this point. Mom will start weaning the kittens on her own, just naturally doing it, or the kittens might get curious about what mom is eating and wean a little early even. Because the mom is there, she will make sure to groom them and keep them clean after meal times. Remember though, you should probably give them a heat source, because if the mom steps away from the babies to have some alone time, they could get a little bit cold. So it's probably a good idea to keep a heat source in the sort of nest area until they're old enough not to need one. Now I haven't had any experience with fostering a mom and babies, but I figured I'd mention this. From my research, that's what I learned a little bit about. So if you have more questions about that, I'm sure there are other people on YouTube that you could find videos of fostering a mom and babies. Kitten Lady you've probably heard of. She has a lot of videos about this. I hope this helped you. I think it's really important to do your research ahead of time and know exactly what you're able to do. For me, I told my foster coordinator I wanted only weaned kittens, at least for my first couple of times, because I had never really been around kittens at all. So I mostly wanted to get used to it and to kind of ease myself into it. Obviously, I've had a little bit of experience bottle feeding at this point, kind of unexpectedly.